Hello, hello, hello. Are you getting our audio? If you get our audio, then please comment in the comment box. If you are getting our audio, then please comment in the comment box. Thank you for your feedback, everyone. We are confirmed that our audio feed is running perfectly. We shall begin our presentations shortly within 15 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I am Sautrik and I will be your moderator for this evening. I am a final year undergrad student of statistics at Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur. Welcome to the webinar organized by the Department of Statistics of Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur. Our topic of discussion today is Epiphenomenalism and Human Sexuality, a Statistical Study. It will be delivered by Sayan Chaki, a final year undergraduate student of statistics of Narendrapur. He is also pursuing a distance BS degree in cognitive psychology and data visualization at Stanford University. The following paper is the original work which has passed the peer review process in a prestigious journal on sexuality and stand for the editorial confirmation. We will also have a question and answer session after the talk, and you can continue asking your question below in the comment section, which I shall forward to the speaker, and we shall begin our session. Good evening, everyone. I am Sautrik and I will be your moderator for this.
Live. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Today's topic, as you all know, is Epiphenomenalism and the Human Sexuality. It's a statistical study. This is a seminar which is organized by the Department of Statistics, and my name is Sayan Chaki. I'll be your speaker for this evening. Now, before delving deep into the presentation, I'd just like to give my acknowledgements to the professors of my department and everyone who's been a part of this project, the moderators and the studio manager, everyone. And this project will be essentially, the presentation will be essentially graded into few parts. Firstly, I'll be talking about epiphenomenalism and this sexuality distinctively, and I'll be defining what is epiphenomenalism in philosophy and how it links to psychology, and the prenatal question whether sexuality is a cause of nature, whether it is a cause of nurture, or is it a cause of causative effect of both nature and nurture combined. And correspondingly, after that I'll be talking about the statistical conclusions that I have obtained from the study, which was which was on the basis of two distinct surveys, which was conducted large scale among people in throughout India. And finally, I'll be talking about how the romantic ideology is independent of the sexual attractiveness, and how sexual attractiveness is concurrently dependent in somehow on romantic ideological differences. Okay, so now we shall delve deep into the presentation, and we are going to the first slide. Uh, yep. Yeah, so this is our first slide. Okay, so this is a very bizarre question that I'm going to begin with. So these are four different points. There are four different events, four different subheadings, or that's menstrual cycle, a brain tumor, addiction to junk food, and anabolics. Okay, so what I'm asking is, what's the basic connection? There's a bizarre connection that links all four of them. Okay, now you can guess if you want, and you can put your guesses in the comment section. But if I ask anyone from a biological background, or anyone who has basic knowledge in biology, the first thing that will come to their mind is hormones, which is a very common answer, which is evidently true. Of course, hormones, menstrual cycle is related to hormonal imbalances. There are hormonal imbalances when you have brain tumor. Similar case with junk food and anabolics, that is steroids. But interestingly enough, all these 4 points were basically used to successfully defend a murderer in court of law. Yeah, that's very bizarre. But all of the 4 points were successfully used to defend or reduce the life sentence of a murderer, and in one case, the life sentence of a double murderer. For example, in the first case, which was the menstrual cycle in females, in the defense of a female murderer, the defendants claimed that she was having her periods during the time, linking it to a literature exhibiting that a disproportionate share of female aggression comes around during the time of menses. Okay, and wonderfully, what happened was, because of this, her life sentence was reduced by 5 years, which was supposedly to be 30 years, and it was concurrently reduced to 25 years. Now, in the second case, that is brain tumor. Now, there's a region in the brain which is very often called, which is scientifically called the amygdala, which is responsible for regulating our reactions and perceptions to aggression and fear. And a brain tumor in that region can cause huge levels of aggression, unviolent behavior, and fear. And often one shows extreme violent behavior to a very close ones and ends up murdering someone. In this case, what happened was a father was convicted of murdering his children and his wife, and it was found, and in his testimony it was provided that this father had a brain tumor in this region, thereby creating a bizarre violent nature in his psyche and his emotional state, different levels in hormonal state, and thereby exhibiting a violent nature. Now, in the third case, and this is a very famous case, which is if anyone hears anyone hears who's attending a lecture who studies law will know this. It's famously known as the Tweaky defense. And there was this man called Dan White who was a San Francisco supervisor. Now, this supervisor was fired from his job, and thereby he ended up assassinating the mayor of San Francisco and Harvey Milk. And famously, in his defense, it was claimed that he was addicted to junk food, thereby causing varying fluctuations in his blood sugar levels, thereby making him take a step. And he is a double murderer, you must note. And from a death sentence, he was transferred to a life sentence of 30 years. And in the fourth case, which is a very common case, we find a lot of bodybuilders who take anabolics end up having such violent natures, who exhibit such violent natures. And it has also been used in the court of law to defend a murderer. Now, the basic question is, why did I mention this at the very beginning of the talk? What does it link to sexuality, right? Now, what I'm basically trying to say is there's a field of science called behavioral biology, okay? And this field basically deals and tries to understand what creates ourselves, what is basically the inherent nature, what is the causative effect of our inherent nature. That is, why do we like a person that we like? Suppose if you have a girlfriend or if you have a boyfriend, now the question is, why do you choose her to be your girlfriend, or why do you choose him to be your boyfriend? Similarly, you can ask several other questions. For example, why do we love coffee? Why do I prefer coffee over tea, or why do I prefer tea over coffee? For example, in my case, my family, I rarely had coffee in my family when I was young, but I later grew up to prefer coffee. Now, it may sound very bizarre when I'm trying to link sexuality with the idea of how I prefer, or why do I prefer coffee over tea. But the basic fact that I want to propose is in sexuality as a whole is a combined nature, is totally combined as by nature and nurture. That is, it is inherent. Of course, sexuality is something which is inherent, but there are certain environmental aspects and societal aspects linked to it that helps in determining our sexuality. And I'll tell you why. For example, there is no particular and confirmed scientific evidence that tells you that yes, sexuality is prenatal. That is, it is inherent. It is because of certain because of genetical orientation in your biology. And neither is there any Freudian psychology related to it, saying that yes, it depends on how you are brought up as a child. And for this, we conducted the survey that was conducted. It was basically conducted on siblings. But before that, I'll be talking about epiphenomenalism. Yeah. So what is epiphenomenalism basically? Epiphenomenalism states that mental states are caused by physical activities in the brain, and it goes on to study how much our psychological perceptions affect the decisions we make. So it basically asks what makes us choose what we choose. Like just beforehand, I asked you the questions. Why do you choose a person? Why do you choose to marry one particular person? Why? My question is, why the particularness of that person? The question is the objectivity. Why a subject chooses an object in particular? That's what epiphenomenalism tries to answer. Now, there is a dual that exists in philosophy, which is popularly called the dual between dualism and physicalism, and it's famously linked to the mind-body problem. Now, I will quickly give you an idea about the dual that exists between dualism and physicalism. Okay. And so here it's so dualism tells us that what makes us human is something more than the normal biochemical reactions that happens in our body. Now, what do I mean by this? What do I mean is, uh, say when you fall in love with a person, or when you watch a very beautiful, a wonderful movie, when you listen to music, there's a release of dopamine and serotonin in your brain that makes you feel good, right? Now, the question is, of course, okay, so this particular music makes you feel good, this particular person makes you feel good, but if I ask you why that particular thing, now physicalism states that that is also related to, like, it also can be explained by the structure of your body, the structure of the neural structure of your brain, etc., etc. But dualism states no, there is something apart from it that is attached to your body, that is attached to your persona, which is called qualia. And this basic entire phenomenon is as together called your consciousness. Now, for example, if I say that physicalism is true, now what does it mean basically? It means that suppose in a dystopian future, we are successfully able to create an artificial intelligence system that completely copies your neural structure. Now the question is, if I give that artificial intelligence and you simultaneously a tautological question, then will you and that artificial intelligence system choose the same answers to that question or not? So if physicalism is true, depending on your neural structure, of course, then you are the artificial intelligence system, as well as you yourself will choose same questions. But in that case, dualism turns out to be false. It states that there are certain experiences in life that hampers our choices. So if I even create an artificial intelligence system, it may not choose the same answers to the tautological questions as you. So this is why the basic dual between dualism and physicalism is very much important. But we are here to understand basically the cognitive relationship that exists between human sexuality and epiphenomena, and we'll get into that shortly. Okay. Yeah. So now we will be talking about the basic pilot survey. Okay, so this is the slide which I was talking about. What interests us the most is not the subject, rather the object. If every feeling or emotion is chemical, then why is the object of the outburst distinct? Will the artificial intelligent computer be attracted to the same person as you are? So that's what epiphenomenalism tries to ask and answer simultaneously. Now, we'll go to our first pilot survey that we conducted. It was conducted over 110 participants. Both where we asked only those who had siblings to answer this question, so that we could get data from both the siblings, and we used replication ideology of a design of experiments to get data from both the participants, that is the first sibling and the second sibling. So what we tried to understand by the pilot survey is, first pilot survey is, to what extent is Freudian causes important in judging the sexuality of a person? The Freudian causes important to judge the sexuality of a person. Now, what we did was we asked certain important questions. Then okay. So what we asked to the readers, to basically the survey participants, was firstly they name the general sexuality, the gender, their age, the sexuality that they prefer, and that the sexual orientation that they have right now, the thing that they have right now. And a very important question is, if they had had a sexual encounter, and the second one, even if they had sexual encounter, did they have sexual encounter with a person who is not in correspondence to their own sexual orientation, which was very important to understand the concept of sexual fluidity, which we will be talking after a bit later in this presentation. Okay, so we study the ground by asking basic questions, as I said, the name, the age, the gender, the sexuality, and if they have had sexual encounter with people of their preference, and if they have had sexual encounter with people other than their orientation. Okay, so what we learned from the pilot survey, so the conclusive results were predicted theoretically. Among the participants, the counter for sexual fluidity is maximum for female heterosexual candidates and is almost nil for heterosexual males. Now, what do I mean by sexual fluidity? I'll be discussing about sexual fluidity much more. I'll delve deeper into it, but I'll give a brief description of what it is now. Sexual fluidity means that you have identified yourself of a particular orientation throughout your life. Say you call yourself heterosexual, or you claim yourself to be homosexual, but yet you have had encounter with say a sexual encounter with someone who is not of your sexual orientation, and you rather enjoyed it, and you would prefer to have other sexual encounters with someone of not your sexual orientation preference. So that's what basic sexual fluidity means. And we found that, which is very trivially true, and we obtained that uh, quite often, that we find that females tend to be more sexually fluid, that they tend to have sexual encounters out of their sexual preferences, sexual orientation preferences, than normal males. Okay, now there are reasons why. There are also reasons why. Now, because the reasons are generally anthropological in nature. So why? Now, the pilot survey that we conducted, and and the data that was obtained, we found that most of the people who registered themselves as homosexuals, most of them in the basic pilot survey were females, or those who preferred them to be bisexuals or asexual in nature, that is out of the normal heterosexuality genre, were females. Now, there are two reasons to explain this, why, and the first is the anthropological reason. Okay, so what it basically means is that throughout the society, has kind of created a hypothetical idea of male masculinity, and the reason is because in like the previous ages, or in the before Christ's age, or during the ice ages, when males were generally, when survival was the fittest, when evolutionary speaking, when survival was the fittest, males used to do most of the physical work, right? And females used to be the primary caretakers of the house, of the family. So because of this reason, what happened was females became more subjective to male domain dominance, and because of this region, this idea of male masculinity percolated through the society, and is very much prevalent even in this era, especially in the regions areas where of the developing countries like India, for example. And because of this reason, the society kind of uh, society prevents, or there's a social anxiety kind of thing among males, that they feel that they are not they are afraid of identifying their own sexuality on any social media platforms. And females are much more liberal in this case, and hence, because of this reason, we find that the number of participants who have registered themselves, although there may be few participants, male participants, who are homosexual or bisexual, they identify themselves as heterosexual candidates. So that's one way of explaining why the counter of homosexual or bisexual females is more than male homosexual candidates, or specifically in a country that is developing right now, like India. Now, we also obtained few striking results showing that most of the times, if the elder sibling is homosexually oriented, the younger sibling tends to have a heterosexual inclination. Now, this also has a kind of a social influence to it, and how society acts to it, because this, of course, because it was a pilot survey and had questionnaire methods, this had errors, right? So I think that my point of view of answering this question, why elder sibling tends to be homosexually oriented and young siblings in more cases have a heterosexual inclination, is because where this is the year is 2020, right? And before now, the millennial, or the 21st century, in the beginning of the 21st century, the idea of sexuality or sexual orientation or LGBTQ rights was not very well thought of, was not widely considered. And because of this reason, many people who, although showed inclination to homosexuality, or showed traits of homosexual nature, they were declined by the society at large. And because of this, they suffered from a lot of social pressures and all that. And because of this reason, the younger sibling noticed that, and kind of they force themselves into thinking that they're heterosexual in nature, which may not be true, which of course may not be true, but it is they have suppressed their sexuality, they're still in the closet. And that's a probable explanation of why this phenomenon is observed in the survey. And we'll now the most important question that we will be talking about today is bisexuality. Bisexuality is a lot difficult case to deal with and understand. Okay, Bisexual behavior is very complicated. Now, in a very famous paper by Gary Zinnick, Identity Conflict or Adaptive Sexuality, Bisexuality Considered, he categorizes on how we can call a person bisexual. He says, there are three criteria necessary for tagging a person bisexual. Okay, first, eroticizing on being sexually aroused by both males and females, engaging in sexual activity with both, and adopting bisexual as a sexuality label. Now, I'll be basically talking about this point and why this definition is flawed. American Association of Psychology, they have graded sexuality into four different distinct parts. That is homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, and asexuality. Now, in the 1980s, before, just after Kinsey and just after Zinnick and people, bisexuality was considered to be a phase. That is, they are confused about their sexuality. They cannot determine whether they're homosexual or heterosexual, and therefore they fall in this phase of bisexuality. Okay, and very famous names claim that bisexuality is not a thing, which was of course false, which later came out to be false. Now, why is this definition flawed? Because of two things. Firstly, it does not take into account the idea of sexual fluidity. And secondly, it doesn't take into account asexuality as a whole. For example, you as a person have, I'm giving examples, you as a person have had homosexual encounters through a heterosexual or homosexual encounters exclusively, either of the one, throughout your lives. Okay, that is, you've had, say if you're a girl, you've had sex with only males, or if you're a boy, you've had sex with only females, and you, depending on that, you categorize yourself as heterosexual, but you haven't had any homosexual encounters in your life yet. Depending on that, what makes you think that if you haven't had, or your sexual awakening to homosexuality hasn't come yet? There's a phase. Bisexuality is not something 50-50. Okay, you are not 50% inclined towards females, you're not 50% inclined towards males. That's not how bisexuality works. Everybody has a sexual preference. Even if you're bisexual, you may have a sexual preference to a particular gender. Suppose if I'm bisexual, I may prefer having sex with someone of the opposite gender, right? And depending on that, say I have had only heterosexual sex, but what goes to say that inside me there is a homosexual inclination as well. So this basically does not take into account that idea, and also not the idea of asexuality. It does not deal with asexuality ever, because before this paper, the idea of asexuality was not predominant and was not considered to be something concrete. Okay, now as I've said that that's what I've talked about, how these the definition is flawed. It does not take into account sexual fluidity, and it has no mention of asexuality as a whole. Now, I'll be talking about two models. Okay, so before discussing the two models, this is the statistic that we observed from the pilot survey. This is a normal pie chart of the siblings and the subject that were this is the legend of male and female. So, yeah. And okay. So, as I previously said, that the number of this chart basically shows you the number of cases when someone claimed to be of heterosexuality, claimed being heterosexual in nature, had homosexual encounter, and the right side is the vice versa of it. And as you can see in the first chart, that females tended to show greater homosexual encounters than heterosexual, despite being heterosexual in nature, than males. Okay, so, and I'll be explaining this probability plot a bit later. Okay, now what I'll be talking about, two basic models that was generated by Gary Zinnick to deal with the idea of sexuality. That is the conflict model and the one-drop sexuality model. Now you'll realize that one-drop sexuality model is false, because according to one-drop sexuality, even if you show a one drop, or that's how it goes, even if you show a slight inclination to homosexuality, you are categorized exclusively as homosexuality. These were the basic first research papers that were coming out in the field of sexology. Now that's of course wrong, because in a paper published by Lisa M. Diamond, titled Female Bisexuality Adolescence to Adulthood, result from a 10-year longitudinal study, she proved that she gives empirical evidence that there are, in fact, appreciable boundaries between the long-term development trajectories of lesbian, bisexual, and unlabeled women. But these boundaries are relatively fluid. Hence, the study supports the notion of bisexuality as a third type of sexual orientation and also supports the notion of bisexuality as a capacity for context-specific flexibility in erotic response. So, that was what one drop theory of the homosexuality predicted, but we are more interested in the conflict model. So the conflict model basically gives two basic reasons why homosexuality is inherent. That's the predispository homosexuality and homosexuality responsiveness. Well, both of them deal with, the first case deals with the Freudian causes that may be responsible for generating your sexuality, and the second one is the prenatal reasons. That is, sexuality is inherent. There are prenatal hormones that are responsible for developing your sexuality as a whole. And it was never conclusively proved that either of these theories are right, because there's no 100% or a 95% significant evidence available to guarantee that. Okay, so yeah, so now we are coming to the second part of our lecture, which is epiphenomenalism and universal sexual fluidity. Okay, so now we'll be discussing about sexual fluidity in detail. So sexual fluidity implies the change in sexual orientation of a person as one gains various experiences in life. Mostly observed in women, causes may be anthropological, as I have explained later, as I have explained previously. And sexual fluidity, now, just before the 21st century, it was thought that yes, sexuality is inherent, that you are homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, asexual, depending on your genetic configuration and certain other aspects of your body. But it was observed that in the beginnings of the 21st century, females, specifically females, showed heterosexual females showed inclination to homosexuality and vice versa. And it was observed that they even enjoyed the encounter. It was not because of some accident, not because like you had a hangover one night and you just ended up with someone, not like something like that. That was a conscious choice, and people enjoyed that. Now that became a question, then how do we explain sexual fluidity using the prenatal idea? Like, does your genetic configuration changes as you go through life? And if you do, and if the genetic configuration changes, what makes it change? Is it completely psychological in nature? Is it completely physiological in nature? And several theories have come out trying to address the idea of universal bisexuality, universal sexual fluidity. But one of the theories that pertains the most is the idea of universal bisexuality. So universal, this study which also tries to prove that the idea of universal bisexuality, which states that in accordance to behavioral biology, we as humans tend to categorize everything. Right, we categorize someone as heterosexual, we label them as homosexual, we label them as bisexual, and someone as asexual. But the problem is, it's not something we can do, because sexuality is not 100% hetero, 100% homosexual. It has percentages of sexual preferences involved in it. That is, you may have 70%, I'm just giving an example, 70% sexual preference towards women, and therefore you generally involved in sexual encounters with women, or vice versa. But that does not tell you that you're not sexually fluid, that you won't be sexually fluid later in your life. Okay, now because of this reason, now for that we consider, to understand this, we basically conducted this extensive survey. Now this is the second survey that we conducted, and the survey was conducted on siblings with 118 participants who were questioned extensively about their sexuality and various other attributes. We used the replication ideology in confirmation to the design of experiments to obtain a sample data of 236 participants to study individually. Okay. Now to check error, that is, what happens is, in these kind of surveys, people generally shy away from admitting the sexuality. Now we posed approximately 30 questions to each of these survey participants, and to reduce the error, what we did was that we used certain questions that followed the Kinsey scale. Now the Kinsey scale is basically a questionnaire scale that grades you on your homosexuality. It has 6 distinct levels of homosexuality, and it shows you where is your inclination, whether you're heterosexually inclined or homosexually inclined. So there were questions posed even there where we asked the so that even if someone claimed to be homosexual, we could judge them on the basis of the Kinsey scale or score on the Kinsey scale. Okay, so yeah, this is the Kinsey scale basically. There are 6 types, as you can see: exclusively heterosexual, mostly heterosexual but more than, slightly homosexual, equally heterosexual and homosexual, mostly homosexual but more than, slightly heterosexual, mostly homosexual, only slightly heterosexual, and exclusively homosexual. Okay. Now this is basically the statistics of the thing. The questions were structured to understand the ideological differences between siblings and if its effect is mostly psychological or physiological in nature. So the average age group of all the survey participants were between 20 to 30 years of age range. There were, of course, certain participants above 30 years. 20% of the individuals claimed to be homosexual, 10% of the individuals claimed to be bisexual, and 8% individuals claimed they were unsure. Among these 8% individuals, 55% showed heavy inclination to homosexuality on the Kinsey scale based on their other answers, and most of these participants among these 55% were males. Okay, now yeah, we'll go to the next slide now. Yeah, so bisexuality and its universality. Okay, now epiphenomenally speaking, it is quite common to observe the sexual fluidity in females, as I taught, and how women do not shy away from having heterosexual affairs despite claiming homosexuality, and converse, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'll be proposing a thought experiment, and because of this thought experiment is exclusive, and it is one of the very important aspects of this paper, and I'll be talking about this thought experiment. And before that, I'll be just giving a quite quick glimpse of the questions that were asked, that are posed to these survey participants. I'll be moving to those. I'll show you those questions first. Yeah. So yeah, the questions were the name of the survey participant, the age, the gender of the survey participant, relationship status, the sexual orientation of survey participant, age at which you acknowledge your sexuality, are your parents aware of your sexual preference? Yeah. Okay. Is your the basic questions on whether you have acknowledged your sexuality publicly, and the important questions that we asked, that we obtained striking results from, were whether you suffered from social anxiety, and if it has any links to being homosexual or being other than heterosexual in nature. And we asked if the candidates like dressing up as someone of the opposite gender when they were young, and if it at all gives any hint about their sexuality, and you later find out that it does not at all. We have statistically proven that, and in some cases it was also found that the prenatal hormones of a child before their birth is responsible for the sexual orientation, and for that we asked if they took any medication continuously for more than 3 months, and what their birth type was, because it was found in a study that caesarean births although not very statistically true, showed greater inclination towards sexuality other than heterosexuality. And these are some of the other questions that we posed, and this slide will be available to you on the website, so you can check out these questions afterwards. Yeah, so this is the thought. I'll be talking about the thought experiment basically that I have designed to understand basically the idea of sexuality and how it affects, and how is society also responsible for judging, for creating your sexuality. Okay, so as I said, epiphenomenalism and sexuality, this is where the basic link exists. So as I talked about dualism and physicalism, right, in the very beginning of our topic, and Frank Jackson in 1950s proposed a thought experiment which is famously known as the Mary's Room problem. Now my thought experiment is inspired by this particular thought experiment, and I'll be first talking about this thought experiment, and then you'll realize how my thought experiment is related to this. Okay, so what does the Mary's Room problem state, right? So Mary's Room problem states that there's a girl, Mary, who's born, this is a hypothetical experiment, is born in a black and white room. Okay, so everything that she observes in her room is black and white, but she has everything in her room, say, and see, for the time being, consider that she sees herself black and white. Okay, and because of this reason, she has never perceived color in her entire life. But Mary grows up to become a color scientist. That is, she knows the physics, the biology, the chemistry, and everything related to color. So she has studied everything about color, the nooks and everything, but she has never perceived color. Right. Now, Frank Jackson asks is, suppose on a 30th birthday, if someone rolls down a red color apple down her door and she looks at red color for the first time, right, will she recognize the red color? And if she does, will she gain any new form of knowledge, right? Now, intuitively, it may seem that, of course, she will gain a new form of knowledge, and therefore it seems that dualism is true, right? Everything is not structured, everything is not that exists in our brains. It cannot be, everything cannot be recreated by informations that we have in our brains. But there are certain things that are dependent on experiences and other perceptions, right? But there is a counter argument for this as well. There is a mathematical model that kind of establishes the idea of physicalism and shows that if I create a proper vector space of all the possible information that Mary has, we can essentially show that the color, the perception of color, is also present in that vector space of Mary's information, the information which is also known as the information vector space. Okay, so now what is my thought experiment and how is it inspired by it? So what I have asked is, suppose there is a girl, we segregate the universe or the world into two basic segments. Okay, we are talking, this is a hypothetical thought experiment. Okay, one consists only of males, and the other is only of females, right? So in both of these regions, we have somehow claimed that, for example, in the case where there are females, we have showed that males are extinct, or males do not exist on the earth anymore, and simultaneously on the male side, we show that females do not exist anymore. And we have in a dystopian future, we have successfully been able to create test tube babies and babies without surrogacy and stuff like that. And what we ask is, we take two basic persons from individuals from each of these groups, that is an exclusive male group and the exclusive female group, and we study them. Okay, so we ask is, say there's a guy called Rohan in the male group and there's a girl called Shruti in the female group. Okay, now we analyze what the likes, the dislikes, and everything of each of these individuals are, and we create an experiment where we try to woo each of these persons, both male and the Rohan and Shruti, using someone of their own sexual orientation, right? That is male in case of male and females in case of females. And suppose they have sexual encounter and they gain a romantic interest between themselves. Now the question is, if someone of the opposite orientation is introduced to either of them, will they be sexually attracted to these individuals, right? To what extent will these individuals have a sexual inclination towards someone of the opposite gender? Okay, now this experiment is very important in understanding to what extent is society and your experiences responsible of orienting your sexuality, right? So this is one of the very important ideas that, because of which this paper got accepted and was accepted in the editorial preview. And I'll also tell you that there are various flaws in this experiment as well. For example, the subject that we are choosing, how will we know that, for example, he has a sexual encounter with someone of his own orientation, and it may be that he's inherently homosexual. So in that case, the thought experiment won't work. So we have to assume that we are choosing, in both the cases, candidates who are heterosexual in nature. Okay, so yeah, that's the thought experiment. This thought experiment was inspired by basically the Mary's room problem. Okay, so the thought experiment, like the Mary's room problem, questions the importance of social and environmental influences on sexuality. We can even question if the attraction that he merely felt was at all psychosexual. Was he ever attracted to males? Will the introduction of a girl in the environment make him or her feel physically attracted to one? And what makes us feel attracted to anyone? That's a universal question. So yeah, these are the questions that I had asked on the survey. Okay, so now we basically come to the statistical analysis of the data that we obtained from our second survey. Okay, so yeah, after this we'll be talking about how sexuality and romantic ideology is linked, and I'll just quickly explain the statistical conclusions that we obtained. Now we wanted to experience the trend in sexual orientation and the different questions that we posed. Okay, so because of this reason we quantified each of the questions with something. For example, in this case you can see the gender: male was represented as 1, female as 2, and others as 3. Relationship status: single, 1, married, has boyfriend, has girlfriend, 2, and something else. Okay, so we have given certain kind of attributes to each of these questions and their answers, because we don't need these values, we just need to find the trend that they have with each other, right? And to find this correlation we have used the Pearson's R score. These are the things, these are how we have quantified each of this, which will, you can look at these later, these informations. Yeah, we have used the Pearson correlation formula used for 2 data sets, and so know that we can essentially use any attributes to represent the factors under play. It won't matter because the Pearson score R is a standardized score R, and for the same differences between the attributes irrespective of scale, the score R will always remain constant. Okay, so if I had say given normal 1 and caesarean 2, it wouldn't have mattered because it standardizes every value that you input in it. Okay, so we use this formula, and so these are the results that we obtained. So Pearson correlation between sexual orientation and dreaming about having sexual intercourse with someone from the same gender is positive, which means that they go hand in hand, and the correlation ratio is approximately around 0.290921. Now the p-value of it is 0.005967. Now we accept a particular we say that this goes along with it, or this is significant enough, or this result is important if the obtained correlation is greater than the p-value. Okay, and hence we can easily claim that the result is significant at p less than 0.05, which is 95% significant level, which is a statistical term that we use to say that it is significant at 95 at approximately 95%. Okay, now for females we obtain that this correlation of having sexual intercourse and dreaming about having sexual intercourse with someone from the same gender is more compared to that of males, and is around 0.066. Now it can be claimed with some vitality that in a larger sample the correlation will increase significantly. Okay, now for a collective sample, the Pearson's correlation ratio between sexual orientation and the interest in dressing as the opposite gender is insignificant, with the R score being 0.04803 and the p-value for 95% level of significance. Okay, so we find that the p-value is very much high in this case compared to the correlation ratio that is obtained, which is 0.04803. So if someone has interest in dressing someone as the opposite gender, that does not necessarily show that he's homosexually inclined or the other. Okay. Now, this is something very important that we obtain, that is a general authority figure in a house. We obtained that if, in case of females, if the general authority figure in the house is a male, say a father, then in that case generally they tend to show more homosexual orientation. Now, I'm not saying that because the father is an authoritarian figure or a male authoritarian figure, they are homosexually inclined. No, it means that they find themselves comfortable, or they find accepting their sexuality, homosexuality, much more comfortable when there's a male authoritative figure in the house rather than a female authoritative figure. And in the same case, we obtain that in case of males. If there is a female authoritative figure in the house, males generally tend to accept their homosexuality or bisexuality more than when there is a male authoritative figure in the house. Okay. It is very striking to notice that the correlation between sexual orientation and social anxiety is very much positive, approximately around 0.3436 against a very low p-value of 0.356. So we see that generally actually this is very much prevalent true, because in a suppressed society like ours, people generally shy away from accepting their sexuality, and therefore kind of suffer from depression and other mental health problems. Okay. Most of the participants who check themselves homosexuals or bisexuals claim to be going well with people from both the genders, and obviously all of them could identify and recognize a well-dressed individual, which does not generally contain itself among homosexuals or bisexuals. Okay, so it was quite 50-50 that almost everybody could identify whether someone of the opposite gender or someone of the same gender was good looking or was dressed well or something like that. So that does not show any kind of inclination or orientation with respect to sexuality. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so this is the age scatter plot, that is number of participants, all the participants, and the age differences. So it's at max we had a lady of 45 years of age, and this is a basic distribution of age. So this is people who've dreamt about sexual intercourse not in accordance to orientation. Blue is the percentage of the people population who've dreamt, and so 23.5% have had dreamt about sexual intercourse with someone not in accordance to your orientation. Okay, so yeah, that's one thing. That's a Freudian reason, Freudian cause that I can explain later. Okay, so this is the final statistical inference that we have done. What we did was we added the sum total of all the questions for each siblings. Okay, so for pair 1, and it goes till pair 48, and note that all these among these 48 pairs that we have used, that we have studied, all these pairs, at least some of these siblings, that is either the elder sibling or the younger sibling, thought that they were homosexual, or they were not sure, or they were bisexual or asexual. Okay, we haven't studied everyone, we have studied only those among whom there was someone of not of the heterosexual nature. Okay, okay, so we shall corresponding use these numeric notations, and these are the scores of each of these individuals. So for pair 1 we find that the score of elder sibling is 6 on the scale, yeah, score of younger sibling is 7, and we have noted all the scores of each of these individuals on this table, and we have found a statistical inference from this. So we are interested in the following hypothesis. So our first the null hypothesis, which we call in statistics, is siblings have almost equal score, that they tend to answer each of these questions, or collectively they answer almost all the questions equally. And H1 was elder sibling has higher score compared to the younger sibling from the calculations that we obtained. Now we obtained, these are some statistical observations that we made. We obtained that under the null hypothesis, the T naught value is 4.79, and it's at 0.05% level of significance. The t value is 1.6779, which is much more less than 4.79, and in that case we generally tend to accept our alternative hypothesis, that is H1, and reject H0. These are certain aspects of the statistical inference. So what we obtain from this basically is that elder sibling tends to have better score than the younger sibling. So conclusively, the elder sibling shall show higher scores on homosexual scale, and tend to be more socially incoherent than the younger sibling. Okay, and I talked about this in the previous slides as well, how elder siblings showed greater scales on homosexuality, or on the Kinsey scale, greater inclination to homosexuality than younger siblings. Okay, now we'll be talking on the third part of the video, which is on the presentation, which is the role of psychology and romantic ideology in sexuality and the choice of libido. Okay, so this is our final topic, and this has very important thing to deal with. Now, the first thing is love induces sexual affinity, but sexual affinity may not induce love at all. Now, how do I explain this? Okay, for example, you may be sexually attracted to a person, but it does not necessarily tell that you will choose him or her or someone non-binary as your sexual partner, right? And it may happen that you are platonically induced or attracted to someone. Now the question is, will you be sexually attracted to that person? Well, it seems so, yes, of course. If you're in love with someone, or if you have a romantic inclination to someone, you will have a sexual attraction to that person. But this holds true, this idea holds true in case of homosexuality, heterosexuality, and bisexuality. But people who are asexual, who categorize themselves as asexual, the idea of romantic ideology and its relation to sexuality is very much difficult and complicated to explain. Why? Because people who claim to be asexual in nature, they do not go by the gender, by general physical attributes of choosing a romantic partner. What they go through is they prefer other platonic factors like kindness or something like that, or say humor, intelligence, whatever. So okay, so it's basically different for asexuality, and it's very much more difficult to explain in that case. One may in general enjoy having intercourse with one gender more than other, but it does not go on to say that I'm not physically attracted to someone from outside my general order of preference, right? As I talked about this in the very beginning, that someone who has heterosexual sex throughout his life may have not had the sexual awakening of having a homosexual sex, and sometime if it does, it turns out that he may be bisexual in nature, and it's not someone is homosexual 100% or someone is heterosexual 100%, right? So yeah, in the book Art of Love by Erich Fromm, he talks about how love can be considered as a solution to the problem of existentialism and is not necessarily sexual in nature. And he uses the idea of asexuality to talk about it, and tells us that how platonic love is also a thing, and that you may not have to be sexually attracted to someone, that you may or may not want may want to choose someone as your romantic partner and marry. Okay, so it may well be there is a perfect person who serves all the platonic requirements of your criterion of a life partner, but not of your sexual preference. Okay, so what in that case? Yeah, okay, now I'll be talking about two participants, two very unique participants, two survey participants, whose case I found very unique. Okay, so these were two female participants who answered questions that might help us understand the concept of psychology and sexual fluidity. They claimed that basically they were homosexual, but despite being homosexual, they were in a heterosexual relationship with someone. Okay, so they had a boyfriend, both of them, and one of them was in a relationship for 4 years and the other was in a relationship for 2 years. Now you must understand that choosing a girlfriend or a boyfriend is a conscious choice. It's not something like marriage. Okay, and if in India, like, you maybe it has happened that you may be homosexual but your parents have married you to someone, to a female person, right? But uh, choosing your girlfriend or boyfriend is conscious choice. Now my question is, why would someone choose uh, someone of the opposite gender when they're homosexual? Okay, and it appeared that in both of their cases, they answered these questions quite similarly. They said that they were not very much attracted to the physical attributes of the person, and they were much more attracted to the platonic ideologies, right? Like kindness, as I said, humor, sarcasm, intelligence, and other things. And when I asked them that what happens, why don't they then feel like, why wouldn't they just choose someone of their own preference, like of their own sexual orientation, because they are not being having satisfactory intercourse and so other things. And they answered that whatever intercourse that they were going through or they have had in the past, it was very satisfactory. Now, there's another question that comes up in the mind is, what about the other parts of the relationship, right? So this person is homosexual and he claims, and he has a boyfriend, right? Now my question is the boyfriend satisfied with all the with the sexual intercourse and stuff like that? Because we have to understand that it is statistically proven that males have a higher sexual drive than females. And I took the liberty and I called them for research purposes, and they agreed to answer a few questions. And the male participants also said that they were much more attracted based on platonic causes than sexual affinities. Okay, so this kind of gives you a hint that yes, probably the idea of probably she hasn't had a heterosexual awakening yet, probably, or she is probably has a greater sexual preference, although towards females, and therefore claims herself to be homosexual, thereby depicting bisexual nature in her basic personality as a whole. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's what this entire presentation, or that's what the entire topic is about to say, that you can't segregate. The idea of segregation is very wrong. There's nothing called 100% heterosexuality, 100% homosexuality. You can love and choose to love whosoever you want, right? And you may be sexually fluid. That is, you may think that you're heterosexual now, but it may turn out few years later that you may enjoy a intercourse, or you may prefer a romantic partner of someone of not your orientation, right? So that's what we try to basically prove through the statistical survey too. And in our corresponding papers, we shall aim at understanding the concept further. We will be developing a formalized version of the definition of bisexuality, and that takes into account asexuality, fluidity, and the want of not copulating with someone unless deemed suitably romantic. We shall also study and analyze the data of the siblings to try find some existing cognitive relationship between sexuality and the control state. Thank you, and these are the references for the paper. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, they can, my moderator, I hope you have commented down below, and my moderator will be emailing these questions to me right now, and I'll be answering your questions. I don't see any questions. So if anyone has any questions, they can comment. They can comment your questions in the live chat. Live chat. Any questions you ask, you can even uh, tell me the name, number slide if something related to the topic. So yeah. Yeah, so Mr. Survadip Roy has said that the last claim needs a greater testing. Of course, the two subjects. Yeah, the last claim needs a greater testing QS. Only two subject is not satisfactory anyway. Yeah, of course. What we observed was among the entire 236 participants, only two people claimed to have this, and I found their cases quite unique, and therefore I took the liberty to call them. Of course, it's not unique to claim something as proper, but it gives you a kind of a feel and ideology. And I have, for example, in the paper this that I have referenced here, Lisa M. Diamond, you will find in the references section, female bisexuality from a 10-year longitudinal study. She found basically that these ideas were also prevalent, that platonic relationships do exist. For example, in case of the asexuality, people generally choose their romantic partners based on their platonic ideologies, like as I talked about, not sexual affinity. So what the idea is basically to find a general theory that will explain a theory that will explain all the causative cases of homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, and asexuality as a whole, and bring them under one category of universal bisexuality, right? There needn't be any categories divided as hetero or homo or bi or asexuality. Yeah. If you have any more questions, uh, I okay. If you feel that if a question hasn't been answered, you can. Okay. Does the survey require? Okay, Amartya Malik has commented, asked that does the survey requires to be conducted on a much larger scale? Actually, it does not need to be conducted on a much larger scale, but for a longer time span. Okay, because sexual fluidity is not something that happens very quickly. Okay, so it may happen that someone who has in our survey claimed to be heterosexual, they after a few years, after say 5 or 6 years, they call themselves bisexual, right? So instead of increasing the number of participants, 236 participants for a sexual study is a lot, because you'll find that even in these papers they have conducted studies with 50 participants, some with 60 participants, but the time span over which they were studied individually was a lot longer. So yeah, we need a longer time span study. Yeah. Okay, any more questions? How, okay, Sarwar Shamanto has asked how sexual orientation has been suppressed in married people. Is there any statistical data? Suppressed in married people means, basically what I'm trying to say is, there are people in our society, especially in developing countries, have who actually are inherently homosexual. They know that they're homosexual. They know that they do not enjoy, because probably because they have a lot more sexual preference towards males, or of their own gender. They know that they do not enjoy intercourse with someone of the opposite gender, and yet they are forced because of society to marry them, and because of that reason they are not being able to get out of this model of society and acknowledge who they are. So yeah, in that case their sexuality is suppressed, not in suppressed that they do not know. They know, but they feel afraid to acknowledge their sexuality. And yes, there are certain statistical data where people, all those who are married, have showed higher ranks, scores in homosexuality and Kinsey scale. I'll try and link those papers as if possible on my website. Okay. Okay, so there's a question by Shoham Ghosh. Pearsonian correlation measured between sexual orientation and dressing interests, both of which are categorical nominal variables. I didn't get your question. Sorry. Can you ask the question once again? Are you asking whether they are categorical or nominal variable? Okay, so the first thing that I've claimed that I'm not basically using these uh, parameters for anything. Okay, I'm not using these parameters to claim something. I'm just basically using these parameters to study the trend between two basic topics. For example, sexual orientation and the need to and dressing as a particular person. Okay, so if I even if I said say if I had given something like 63, 64 or something like that, because Pearson correlation is a standardized correlation measure, because of that reason, for any parameter it will boil down and show you the basic to the same correlation value. Acha. Yeah, contingency analysis is also possible. Yeah, so Soham Ghosh has said that yeah, contingency analysis and Goodman-Kruskal is also possible to do this, but there is a basic problem doing that, and that is that because we are working with various multiple variables here, and there's a factor that most of these statistical studies that have been conducted on sexuology, they use kind of Pearsonian correlation to judge the trend. It's because of that reason it is much more preferable to use. Yeah, yeah, but of course we can use those things, and I was yeah. Yeah. So Amritar Ganguly asked that does the homosexuality have any correlation with genetics? See, neither of the theories, people till the beginning of the 21st century, it was thought, yes, it is completely dependent on your biological structure, your genetic structure, your prenatal hormones. But when sexual fluidity started appearing and people showed affinity to a sexual fluidity, this thing started becoming a lot more different. And there is no particular theory claiming that yes, this is 100% true, that 100% genetic orientation is responsible. But yes, there are, of course, it's a combination of both. Social your affinities, your social life, as well as your environmental life and your biological structure. Yes. Yeah, I answered that question from Amartumalik. Yeah. No. Okay. Okay, so there's another question. Can gender fluidity ascend and descend due to past and present milieu based on behavior science? Yes, of course, it can happen. Yeah, so sexual fluidity can alter at very large scales. Okay, so suppose you are showing heterosexuality now, and say in your late 30s you start showing traits of homosexuality, and then again after 5 years you again tend to change your sexuality. So yeah, it can ascend and descend. It happens. There are statistical studies for that. You will find all these things in my references. If you look up these papers, there are you will find data suggesting to every one of these. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Shubhadeep Roy has asked, in India, attributing love with platonic factors is largely by society. So, have you thought anything how to get the real data? As I don't think standardization can identify this. So, no, actually, the data that I have gathered is from India, but what happened was, apart from this, there are other certain data that are based on asexual candidates who have shown these traits of choosing partners based on platonic ideas and not sexual affinities. Yeah, so yeah, that data is also, as I said, you'll find all these in my references in the papers. There are data from Western cultures and Western societies, USA and places like that, who are asexual and mostly choose their partners based on uh, platonic ideas or not necessarily sexual ideas. Yeah. Yeah, what is pansexuality? Pansexuality is a further gradation of the four forms of four forms of sexuality. There is pansexual, demisexual. Note sapiosexual is not psychologically accepted form of sexuality. So if anyone claims to be sapiosexual, it's nothing. It's not an accepted form of sexuality. Pansexuality means that you don't border yourself on any sexuality. You can choose to have intercourse with people of transgender as well, apart from males and females. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, so people are asking how to access my paper. My paper has passed the peer review process and is under the editorial review, and it will probably be, if the editorial review passes, it will be by the end of August, and after that it will be available on the journal's website. I'll keep looking on my website. I'll probably add the DOI ID for it. Note that there is no archive for sexual papers on sexology. So I hadn't been able to upload my paper on any archive platform. Does Platonic thought also affect on heterosexuality? Actually, there's what the researchers are trying to do is they're trying to find a theory that will basically address all forms of sexuality. That is, these basic forms of sexuality, and it is very evident that Platonic thought processes do affect your choice of a partner in case of asexuals, and to some extent, for very low percentage of people, it has been observed that in heterosexual candidates also these do show certain kinds of affinity, but not in case during when your puberty hits. We'll realize that when it's a different case when your puberty hits, right? When you're 15 or 16, when your puberty hits, you are the only thing, the thought in your mind and your idea of a romantic ideology is basically totally based on physical attributes, right? But down the line, when you age and you, like in your 20s and 30s, during that phase, to some extent it has been observed. There are examples of, but nothing to be claimed statistically that, yeah. Does animal have homosexuality or bisexuality? Yeah, of course. It has been obtained. It has been found that animals do exhibit homosexuality, and I don't know about bisexuality. I haven't studied about bisexuality, but yes, there have been observed homosexual instances in animals. There, you can find it on Nat Geo's website. They have certain articles on that. Yeah. Okay. Any last question? Any last questions? I think we can take 2 more questions. Okay, so I think that there are no more questions. So thank you for attending the webinar. I really appreciate it. The department also shows their gratitude for attending the webinar. We'll be concluding the webinar now. I'll be passing the mic to Sautrik, and he'll be concluding the webinar. So thank you very much. And the presentation will be available on my website, so anyone can download it. And if there are any further questions, they can contact me on my Facebook or Instagram ID. And I'll upload my DOI link after the paper gets published. So stay tuned. And thank you very much.
Thanks, you. Acknowledgement.
Huh?
Acknowledgement.
Okay. So I'd like to thank basically Sautrik, Gaguly, and Dipranjan who have been the moderators and who have been sending and forwarding me the questions. And I'd like to thank John Major Sarkar. He's from the Department of Physics, Tezpur University, and he has been the studio manager of the entire session. All the technical things that you have observed, from slide transitions to the other things, they have been managed by him. And I would also like to thank my professors of the department for giving me the chance to conduct this webinar. Thank you very much. And lastly, I'd like to thank Ramakrishna Mission Narendrapur for giving me this platform and allowing me to speak on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending this webinar. A certificate will be issued to you later. If anyone has a question, he or she can contact the speaker on Facebook, Instagram, and the presentation will be available on the website for download.